as we continue on with other stories on the Australian tomorrow, and it is all about China and the Solomon Islands. Chinese troops to come next is the headline. Australia and the US are bracing for the rapid deployment of Chinese security forces to the Solomon Islands, fearing that Beijing will move to seal a controversial new security agreement by putting boots on the ground as soon as possible. Strategists said China would move as fast as it can to establish a foothold in the country, as the Solomon Islands opposition warned that the country's Prime Minister, Mahasina Soganver, would use the Chinese presence to tighten his hold on power. Erin, we've heard today from former Foreign Affairs Minister Julie Bishop saying that this is a massive failure and we should have had, and then also we saw that the opposition Foreign Affairs Minister said that the Foreign Minister should be in the Solomon Islands right now. You have experience in things like foreign policy and diplomacy. How do we move forward on this to ensure that Australia gets the best outcome from this?
Well, I wish I had the bullet to answer that question.
I put a lot on you with that.
You know, that's a really terrible phrasing of mine as well in this context. But, you know, I've said this before and I'll say it again. You know, the Solomon Islands is a sovereign nation, and we all, as other sovereign states and other powers and other influence, can influence. But at the end of the day, the Solomon Islands is going to make that choice. So have we done the right thing in terms of our diplomacy and influence? Maybe we haven't. But what are we going to do going forward? And this is what we're looking for from our political leaders right now is, okay, let's acknowledge that this was an error. It, you know, as has been said today, a foreign policy failure. But what do we actually do going forward here? And what are our options when we actually do have a Chinese military base in the Pacific? What does that then mean for us? It's something that I think we've sort of not lost the ball on. There are plenty of watchers out there. There are plenty of analysts out there. But, you know, throughout COVID, we have been very inwardly focused on Australia, and that has implications not only in the Pacific but in Southeast Asia and other regions as well. So, you know, we do see that China exerts its influence very strategically at a very granular level, whether it's trying to recruit individuals for intelligence, whether it's, you know, these more strategic plays as well. China does that, and China hasn't dropped the ball, it would seem, over the last few years.
I think it's really interesting, and one highlight for me with the opposition leader this evening, where he kind of really summarised the situation for those people that may not be that well engaged with the situation of what's happening and what this could potentially mean for Australia, when he basically said that we could have Chinese forces closer to Perth than what we do when we are in Brisbane right now, which is quite interesting. And I felt that kind of, I think that landed, maybe not within the room there in Brisbane, but I think that is going to land. If you start talking about it in regards to, you know, the Solomon Islands is only really 2,000 k's away from Queensland. That's very close for comfort. So I guess it's right that we saw a lot of questions asked about that tonight.
It might be that way, but, you know, there are a lot of other countries that are very close to, you know, our northern states in this country. So the north of Western Australia, the Northern Territory and Queensland as well. So does that land? I'm not sure. I don't think that foreign policy in many ways lands with voters. I think what does land with voters is national security. And, you know, the Liberal Party tends to be seen as the national security party. And if anything, historically, we've seen that Labor has been much more open in terms of its dealings with China. So there's a difficult piece at play here where any sort of national security concerns often will mean that people will tend to vote towards the Liberals anyway. And in fact, I've said this before and I'll say it again, you know, the Ukraine, unfortunately, probably was good for Scott Morrison in some ways, because people want to feel safe, they want to feel secure, and they're concerned about Russia. Now, obviously, China, you know, if you could frame it potentially in that way, maybe that will land with some people. But I think national security works. I'm not sure that the whole foreign policy failure of diplomacy, I don't think most people understand what diplomacy is or what it means. I mean, I can't understand it sometimes. So, you know, and I work in the space, so we're all still trying to figure it out, and how are we going to influence and how we're going to win friends. But, you know, I think it's a really tricky one for both sides. And as I said, I really want to see what Labor actually is going to do in terms of tangible steps to potentially, you know, resolve whatever this is, because I don't think there is an answer that's going to suddenly claw back or that's going to put people's mind at ease in terms of that proximity between Australia and, say, Queensland or anywhere else.
Yeah. Indeed.